All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started this evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Haitian American Museum of Chicago's info session tonight on the Early Resolution Program presented by Elliot Heilman. This program is a part of HAMOC's 2022 Haitian Heritage Month Celebration, where we will be uplifting Haiti and the Haitian diaspora all month. Okay. My name is Carlos Bossard, and I'm the executive director here at the museum. It's great to see you all, and thank you so much for joining us. HAMOC's mission is to promote and preserve Haitian art, culture, history, and community in Chicago and beyond. Education is at the core of our mission, and we are glad to continue to bring insightful, meaningful, and impactful lectures and programs to the community. Before we begin, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping and let you all know the format of tonight's program. First, this program is being recorded, and if you do not wish to be seen, feel free to turn off your video cameras. Also, all of you were put on mute as you entered the room. Please make sure to remain on mute throughout the program to ensure everyone can hear the presenter. Auto-generated captioning has been turned on for accessibility, and if you would like access to that transcript after the program, please feel free to let me know and we can make that available to you. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A session with Elliot, and at that time, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask any questions. If there are any questions that come up during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat for later, and I can relay those to Elliot when we get to the Q&A session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Elliot Heilman. Elliot joined the Center for Conflict Resolution as a program manager for the Early Resolution Program in December 2020. Prior to working at CCR, Elliot worked at Illinois Humanities, where he helped plan and implement the Envisioning Justice Initiative, which used the arts and humanities to push for criminal justice reform efforts, and led the Illinois Speaks program, which promotes small, community-based discussions around Illinois. Elliot received his PhD in Communication Studies from Northwestern in 2015 with a dissertation on the social reform efforts of the Mexican avant-garde in the 1920s, taught English at a public university in Puebla, Mexico, and received his BA in Classical Languages from Williams College. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Elliot Heilman.
Hey y'all, thank you so much for joining us on a Friday evening. Storms are rolling in, the clouds are looking a little bit menacing right now, but we're safe inside and that's a good thing. It's also nice to be back here supporting HAMOC. Elsie and I had worked together in the Illinois Speaks program, trying to promote community conversations, and so it's nice to come back, and I'm always a friend of HAMOC and always happy to help out however I can. I also hope that if anybody's watching this later, that you learn about some free resources that are being made available. One of the things I've seen is that, sometimes it's hard to find resources. It's hard to find maybe sufficient resources, but there are a lot of resources out there. And oftentimes the issue is that people don't know about them or don't know how to connect to them. So happy to be a part of letting people know what's going on. But so when I had been working with HAMOC, we had been doing stuff around small group conversations, and Elsie and I were kind of all committed to the idea that, people don't sit and talk enough. People end up acting, people end up separating, people don't come together, and especially have conversations with people who they may not otherwise agree with or may not otherwise sort of run into in their everyday life. And so, after I left my previous job, I ended up at the Center for Conflict Resolution, working on mediation, which is kind of, for me, a natural extension from the conversation facilitation work that we had been doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mediation, alternative dispute resolution, and everything. I'm going to share my screen and do a little, informal presentation here. I'm just going to go into slideshow mode. All right, so there's the official title, my name, and everything like that. So what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to just give an overview of sort of the space that we're in, which is alternative dispute resolution, and also mediation as a part of alternative dispute resolution. So that's in general sense of like who we are, what we're doing here, and what space we're in. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the Center for Conflict Resolution and what kind of free resources they provide. And then I'm going to delve a little bit more specifically into the Early Resolution Program. and talk about sort of people who need any support who are going through eviction cases or worried about evictions or have a consumer debt case, somebody suing them for credit card debt or an auto loan or something like that. So just to start out, again, we're talking broadly about alternative dispute resolution. So some of you may have heard this title before. I just want to talk about sort of why I think it's important, to me. So, one of the things is when we talk about alternative dispute resolution, in a lot of ways, what we're talking about is resolving some kind of conflict outside of some normal other ways that we might do it. And so that's primarily the legal system. So usually we have this system in the United States where, somebody, me and Carlos have a beef and we can't resolve it. And so we end up going to court and you have all this complicated processes and going to court. And then finally, at some point, a judge or a jury kind of makes a decision about who's right and who's wrong. And so that legal system, as we all know, or as I believe many of us here know, may not be equitable. So in terms of like how you access that, how familiar you are with the system, if you have access to a lawyer who can kind of advocate for you, or even if you know how to present your arguments and evidence in the way that the court would like you to do it. So it's not necessarily the legal system you don't have equitable access to that legal system. Again, just part of that as well is it's not easily navigated. In this job, I spend a lot of time in court, and so I am not a lawyer. I did not previously spend a lot of time in court, and so I had to learn a lot of this stuff. So you have things like, for instance, dismiss with prejudice, dismiss without prejudice. Those are terms that that are actually counterintuitive. So dismiss with prejudice means that a case is completely done, can never be brought back again. But that's with prejudice, which doesn't make sense. Dismiss without prejudice means that the case is put to sleep, but can be brought back awake again. And these are things that just don't make sense necessarily intuitively. So even how you file a case, how you get service, how you work with the sheriff's office, what happens if you have trouble getting service, how do you collect on a money judgment? All of these things, technically you can get a money judgment from a judge who says, hey, Elliot, you got to pay Carlos $2,000. And the judge says that, but then the question is, well, the judge isn't literally going to take money from me and give it to Carlos. I have to go through a separate process to try and get that money, right? So again, it's not easily navigated. And then finally, the legal system may not actually provide some resolution. I mean, it does in one sense when you say this is the final decision, you can't go back. But oftentimes that decision is usually framed in terms of somebody wins and somebody loses. When in reality, we can think about there may be actually ways to resolve conflict that is maybe a little bit more of a compromise, or maybe more of I understand why this is important. Can you understand why this is important to me? And we can figure out some way to both get something that matters to us. And so that is less, that kind of compromise or not win-lose situation is less prevalent in the legal system. I remain firmly committed to the idea that a judge and jury are not the only ones who can decide how to resolve a conflict. So, there's a system set up and everything like that. But I personally believe that whenever possible, the people who are involved in that conflict know what the best possible resolution for them is. And so for me, it's about giving people agency, because conflict is a natural part of life. We're never going to get rid of it. We have to think about how to navigate it, and also how navigating conflict might also help, maybe give us skills that we can take on beyond that, but also help us maybe be able to live with a resolution in a way that, a court judgment might not allow us to do as well. So, under the broad title of alternative dispute resolution, there's a lot of different things that we can think of. Obviously, I'm talking about mediation specifically here. I do also want to highlight, we have a strong restorative justice network here in Chicago. There's the restorative justice hubs, and they've only been growing ever since, for over the past 5-10 years. Restorative justice is a similar model of trying to kind of essentially talk it out. And also, Natasha, I mean, I'm happy doing informal stuff. So if you have a question right now, I'd rather you just chime in and I can address it right now.
I just wanted you to expand on what restorative justice was, but you started going into just, I think you said more conversation.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so, yeah, in restorative justice, I urge you, there's a lot of great organizations out there. One that I'm just going to highlight right now that's kind of more on the north side is called Circles and Ciphers. They're up at on Morse, right by Ashland, and they are an amazing organization led by primarily by youth of color. They have a heavy sort of influence with sort of hip hop and freestyle as a way of kind of not only expression, but also kind of communication going on there. But essentially, you know, restorative justice, the idea there is that you have a group of people who are sitting down, forming a community. And in that, you have the person who's maybe accused of committing harm, and then you have the person or people who have been impacted by that harm. And you go around and you try to talk about sort of what that impact is, and you try and think about ways of restoring the harm, as opposed to sort of like a more punitive method. Like, let's say somebody steals a purse from somebody, right? In the legal system, that person, if that person gets caught, they get sent to like to probation or to jail or something like that. And the idea there is like, oh, we're gonna, kind of tell them not to do it again. But restorative justice says that doesn't solve anything. That doesn't change the behavior. That doesn't help us understand sort of the reasons why that purse was stolen. So the person who goes ahead and commits that harm gets a chance to kind of explain sort of what was going on, why that happened, if this is part of a pattern, if it was something that happened, my friends egged me on to do it. I don't normally do this, and I was acting really stupid, and I don't want this to impact me moving forward. Maybe that's the case. Or the people who are harmed can help explain, well, like my social security card was in that wallet, and I had to use it to go to this meeting, and it had this severe impact. It wasn't just that you stole it and were able to go off. That's in general, that's the general idea is to restore a sense of balance when a harm has been committed and has upset that balance in a community. Another example, negotiated settlement. This is something that's super prevalent in the legal system. And so negotiated settlement is essentially when a lawyer talks with another person who's maybe not a lawyer, or two lawyers are just talking, and they're essentially just going in there being like, hey, my client's comfortable paying $750. The other guy says, my client won't accept anything under $1,500. And then they come to maybe some kind of agreement in the middle. I'll pay you $1,000 or something like that. But it's mostly just a much more just like we're negotiating right there in a very kind of straightforward way. Final example is arbitration. And arbitration is essentially where you have two parties who have conflict, somebody who is a neutral third party. So maybe somebody like me would come in there, and that person, the arbiter, would have the power to kind of make a final decision. They would listen to both parties, and they're essentially kind of like this judge that's right there, but it's not in a courtroom. But my point here is that these are all systems that allow us these are all well-established things that happen in the world that allow us to think about other ways of thinking about of resolving conflict. And I want us to just place mediation within that, because mediation is a great resource and I'm a big fan of it, but I do not believe that it's the only resource, and I do not believe that it's the best resource all the time for everyone, no matter what. So I'm just putting that in there. But let's talk about mediation particularly. There's different styles and practices. One of the examples that's similar to kind of like that facilitated negotiation is called shuttle mediation, where I would literally be going in between two parties, taking one offer, talking to the other party. It's essentially like a negotiation. That's not what we do at the Center for Conflict Resolution. What we do is something called facilitated mediation. And that's a term that doesn't need to stay with you. But what I want to stay with you is the values that are behind it, which is facilitative mediation is about the mediator trying to create a space in which the parties feel comfortable advocating for themselves and also feel receptive to hearing what the other party has to say and thinking critically about what's important to them and what's not as important to them. So in that type of mediation that I'm trained in and that Center for Conflict Resolution does, The mediator is kind of there to guide the conversation. The mediator is not there to provide advice. The mediator is not there to tell you what you should do. The mediator can't tell you if that's a good idea or not. And sometimes that's extremely frustrating, right? As a person, because you see somebody who's saying something, you're like, that's obviously wrong. And all you can do is it's heavily question oriented. It's a lot about restating what people say to make sure you understand it correctly, and then asking a question that kind of furthers the conversation. An important thing about mediation is that the mediator is a neutral third party. And so what that means is the mediator does not have a stake in what the outcome is, and is there just literally saying, hey, this is my first time seeing this thing. You guys tell me what's going on. I'm gonna help you guys maybe have a conversation about it. But me as a mediator, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, I can have my own personal opinions, right? But like as me in my role as a mediator, my role there is to not take sides, is to not advocate for anybody. I'm advocating for the process. I'm advocating for the conversation. I'm advocating for people feeling safe to speak about what what's on their mind, and also to hear what the other person has on their mind. And in order to kind of work towards a resolution, there's a whole training, and I invite you to reach out to the Center for Conflict Resolution if you're interested in that training, especially for nonprofit organizations. I believe that there is it's either free or reduced cost for those things. But for a mediator, one of the things that we're trained to do is to kind of identify from hearing what people are talking about and how they're talking about. We're trying to identify what we call needs and interests, and you can think about it as what are the base most important things that are going on here. So there's a whole lot of detail that may come out. Somebody's been living with this thing, they're very worked up about it, and that's very understandable. We never deal with people when they're having their best day. But when we're talking to them, we're trying to understand sort of what are the really important things that this person cares about, and why do they care about it, and what are the things that the other person cares about, and why do they care about it, and that helps us maybe link up. So one of the other things that we say is that rarely when people are talking about money, is it actually about the money itself, but right, like money represents something. So maybe it represents security. Maybe it represents a sense of personal responsibility or agency or whatever. So we're trying to delve down to some of those things. So it's not necessarily about like, oh, you owe me $1,200. No, I only will give you $750. Something like that. Today is so. And Elsie, I'm just going to help you. Thank you. Final thing that I wanted to mark here is we do what we call reality testing. So if people are coming to some kind of an agreement about what's going on or how they'd like to move forward, there's a number of different things that can happen. We can write those agreements up. If people are working, if they're involved in a court case, we work with the court system and can help draft legal documents that can help kind of serve as a legal testament to that the judge signs off on. But before we do that, we want to go ahead and really make sure that somebody sort of understands what they're agreeing to and can follow through with it. And the importance here is that we want to try to create agreements that are durable, that people can actually live with. And I think that, we can all understand that if I've been in a court case for a while and I have lots of other things going on in my life, and I just want this court case out of my life, I may be saying, oh, I will pay you, I'll pay you, $5,000 tomorrow, and then I'll pay you, $100 every week for the next 20 years. Or something like that, whatever it takes to get out. And so what we want to do is we want to say, hey, like it seems like you had trouble accessing funds before. Where do you think you're going to get this $5,000 from? Like, do you have that already? And then even for the $100, like, are you going to be able to kind of like stay up with a payment schedule that's 20 years out? Like, that's a really long time. And my job is not to sit there and cast doubts on anybody. I'm there to ask questions to hopefully prompt critical reflections, and it's hard to do that sometimes without giving a sense of judgment, and that's a very hard thing to do. But really, what I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to say that they can't do something. I'm trying to understand and have the other person hear how they will do it. If that makes sense. All right, so for the Center of Conflict Resolution, I did find an uptown connection here, so that's a good thing. It was started by young lawyers as part of the Chicago Bar Foundation back in 1979. And so they were responding to this idea of not every case needs to go through court, not every case needs to be heard by a judge or jury. And it was actually first known as the Neighborhood Justice Center of Chicago, and it was originally located in Chicago, in Uptown, but then has since expanded out to serve as a community mediation center, really all across Chicago, but really we talk to people all across the country. We even do international mediations. A lot of stuff since the pandemic has switched obviously towards online. So we've been moving towards online mediations, which actually has allowed us to, you lose something with the person not physically being there, but it does allow us to provide services to people who do not need to come to downtown Chicago in order to receive them. So, that's exciting. I understand that there's also some stuff that's lost when we're not in person as well. And so Center for Conflict Resolution and supporting community mediation, they do a number of different things that I want to highlight here. Number one, we train volunteer mediators. Those are the people who are usually mediating our cases. These volunteers, they come from all different walks of life. We have a number of people who are in law school, who are trained in mediation and do mediate cases as part of their sort of education. But we also have people who are former lawyers. We have people who are just interested and have the time to do this. So it really ranges. It's about a certain disposition, I think, more than anything. So we train a bunch of volunteer mediators first. We mediate court-referred cases. And I'll talk about that a little bit further on, but I just want to highlight that we mediate a number of different types of court-referred cases. So obviously eviction and consumer debt cases, I'll talk about those later. We also have a very strong program with the domestic violence court and the court over at 55 West Harrison. They do a lot of stalking, no contact cases, which what that means is somebody takes out an order of possession or an order of protection against somebody else. And a lot of times the judge says, hey, why don't I order you to go to mediation, see if you can try to resolve that. A lot of those order of protection cases, not all of them, but a lot of them end up being love triangles, which can sometimes feel a little bit like a telenovela or something like that. But there are a number of ways and a number of instances in which I've seen people have taken out an order of protection, and what they really need to do is sit down and talk about sort of what's going on. There wasn't really a threat to one's safety, or they understand that it's actually about maybe this other person who's there, something like that. And then final instance that we have is we also work with, and this is the fourth point here, we work with youth who are court involved at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. And I'm less familiar with this program, but what I do know is that it's youth who are court involved and are preparing to leave the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. And so we're working with them and usually with family members for places that they're returning back to kind of ensure that they kind of talk through some of the issues that they have and have as stable a place to return as possible, because things weren't necessarily all peachy before they got court involved. And so we want to see, to the extent possible, if we can kind of help give them a little bit more of a stable environment. We also do free community mediation. So people can call us up and ask and say, hey, I had this problem. Can I try and mediate? And we get a lot of people who have neighbor disputes. That's a really good example of this. And I see a lot of them where it's a person who has, their neighbor has a tree that's caused some damage or is threatening to, rip up their concrete. That person doesn't really have a lot of recourse. They can call their alderman. Their alderman doesn't really do that much usually. In this case, they could go through the legal system, but maybe not, because maybe damage hasn't happened, or let's say somebody's parking on their yard and they keep on calling the police and it keeps on happening, something like that. It's a way to maybe try to resolve that case, again, where they may not be able to go to court, or they may not have any other sort of good resources available to them. And then finally, we also do, the training department is amazing, and they do a number of different trainings with people, particularly around conflict management. You probably did not see, but there was a story back on WBEZ back in November with Perry Karim, who leads the training department at Center for Conflict Resolution. And it was all about how to have difficult conversations with family members when you're going back home for the holidays. So maybe more relevant to certain people than others, but that's sort of just, again, a wide array. And just, I think that the important thing here to think about is if we think about mediation as sort of an approach to conflict, then it's not necessarily that it has to look like a certain way all the time, but it's rather, an approach to confronting the conflict and trying to work through that conflict that I personally value a whole lot. So I'm here to talk specifically about the early resolution program, and I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly, but please stop me if you have any questions. But the early resolution program is a program that's funded through federal funds in the Cook County, and it was started in the wake of the pandemic, specifically around an expected wave of eviction cases that were going to happen, or other kind of like debt cases. So the expectation was that a lot of people were going to be involved in court cases, precisely because of the financial and other types of impacts that coronavirus had. And so the idea is to make it more of a default that people have access to alternative dispute resolution, and as part of that, legal advice. Instead of them having to search it out, it makes it a little bit more of a default that when they show up to court, they're kind of shunted over to getting those resources if they want them. So at the heart of it, the early resolution program is kind of just a consortium of different organizations. So number one is Center for Conflict Resolution, who helps kind of coordinate a lot of access to resources. But then there's a number of legal aid organizations. We have CARPOLS, Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, Legal Aid Chicago, Chicago Volunteer Legal Services, and about 3 or 4 others that are there who are providing those resources. And then we also work very closely with the rental assistance programs in the city of Chicago and also in Cook County, which are separate programs. So we have free legal advice if people want it. The idea here is, yep.
Excuse me, Elliot, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. What is a rental assistance program, if you don't mind me asking?
Gotcha. Yeah. So in the wake of the pandemic, with using federal funds, the state of Illinois, the county of the Cook County, and the city of Chicago all had funds to disperse to give to people who are behind on their rent. And the idea is that many of these cases that we see in eviction court in particular are instances where somebody lost a job, somebody could not go into work for a while, et cetera. They lost income. And so really all they need is to have some help paying that back rent, maybe paying a little bit in the future to give them a little bit of a cushion while they get back on their feet again. And I do see a number of cases that are resolved because it's just that the person has fallen behind on rent. And here's some money that the county or the city can give to you to pay the landlord. And a lot of times the landlord says, great, that's all I needed. And they may bring up an eviction case if that happens in the future with that same tenant. But for the moment, that resolves everything. Does that make sense, Natasha? Okay. All right. And so we have free legal advice. The idea is that people do not necessarily know what's going on when they're part of a court case. And I see this all the time. When I'm in court, people have no clue what's going on. And I completely understand that. The first time I was in court, I had no clue what was going on. Everything happens very fast. But more importantly, people don't always have a clear understanding about what their legal rights are and what their legal options are. And that can be helpful, especially when thinking about possible ways forward. So if I say, oh, they're not going to kick me out because I don't need to pay rent because they can't kick me out, because there's a moratorium on evictions. And I say, oh, well, actually, I wish that were still the case maybe, but actually there's no more moratorium, right? So it's important for that tenant to know that, or for the landlord to say, oh, I'm going to kick them out. I'm going to change the locks right now. You say, no, that's not legal. And you're going to have a lot of trouble if you do that. So allowing people to kind of participate more fully in the system. Again, rental assistance programs, and then mediation is always an option, and we mediate a lot of cases that come through the early resolution program again. But just an important resource to highlight here, for anybody who is worried about an eviction case or who has received a 5-day notice, 30-day notice, or notice of an eviction case, or is waiting to show up to their first court date, there's a free hotline. And that free hotline you can call between 9 a.m., 4 p.m., Monday through Friday, to help to be connected to some free legal advice. And we urge you to do that, especially if people are worried about a potential eviction case, because one of the things that we love to see is when people are worried about an eviction case, we're able to give them support and no case needs to be filed. Because that's a super successful instance of the early resolution program. And so it's a hotline. Again, it's for evictions, the easiest way to understand this, but also there's consumer debt cases. So if somebody's suing you for money, usually under $10,000, those are separate court cases as well. But if you have any questions about it, about whether you qualify or not, just call that hotline number and somebody will talk to you. So the way that I mostly talk to people and connect people to resources, though, is like while I'm in a court call. And I'm there and I'm supporting the judge and I'm supporting the clerk and everything like that. But it's people's usually their first time in court for one of these cases. I just want to highlight a couple of things because not everybody is familiar with court and also how court works these days. Most courtrooms you can join by Zoom. You have an option to go down and actually be physically present, but they do not have a lot of good resources for public computers. So you are able to attend by Zoom. Just familiarize yourself with how to mute and unmute. If you show up, make sure you have your case number or your court paperwork, which just helps everybody identify what's going on and what you need. Just in addition, if you do show up to, especially down in the Daily Center downtown, sometimes court calls may last several hours. So that is an unfortunate part of the process. So if you're showing up to court on a device, please make sure you have your charger, you're plugged in, and you don't have anything planned in the next 3-4 hours. It could be that you get through earlier, hopefully, but I want to prepare you for the worst, so that you'll be happy when the best happens. And in that court call, just to give you a sense about sort of what I do, a case is called. The person says, hey, it's my first time here. I'm not represented by a lawyer. The judge says, well, you qualify for this program. And the judge will go ahead and give your case a continuance. So give it a pause. So that first court date, all you're doing is you're getting diverted into the program and you're getting access to resources. The judge gives you a future court date, usually 2 to 4 to 5 weeks in the future, to allow you to access those resources. And then I move you over to a separate breakout room. I talk to you, I get some contact info, explain what's going on, and try to get you connected to a separate Zoom meeting where all those resources are. But you just kind of work through that process. You'll get a future return date. You'll return back to court on that date. You'll let the judge know, hey, I resolved this case. Everything's good. Or the case isn't resolved. And then it proceeds on its regular path. It eventually goes to a trial room, and eventually a judge or a jury actually goes ahead and makes a decision on it. But what this does is it gives a pause. For when you're in your first time in court, you maybe have that deer in the headlights kind of look going on. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what your options are. It gives you that pause to take some time to figure out your legal rights, your legal options, try and think about what's best for you and how you want to proceed moving forward. So, that's, really general overview. I'm happy to delve into any particular things that are going on, but I do want you all to know that if you have any questions about the early resolution program, you're always welcome to send us an email, erp@ccrchicago.org, or call, and you'll have to leave us a voicemail. We're all working remotely, but we're pretty good about returning those the next day. That number is 312-922-6464, extension 20. And Carlos, that's really all I have right for the moment. Again, I'd love to kind of see if anybody has any particular questions or things that they want me to delve into a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Elliot. And for everyone in the room, if there are any additional questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Elliot.
Sorry to keep asking so many questions. My only thing is, how does one know they qualify for assistance? I think that's going to be one of the most common questions.
Sure thing. Yeah. Fair point. anybody, a lot of there's very few disqualifications for accessing legal aid resources here. So even if you have a question and you're not in court and the judge didn't refer you to that, because if the judge refers you, it's very clear that you're qualified for it. But if you have any questions, you can always call that hotline number that I gave, and I'm happy to give that number again. But in general, the only thing that kind of disqualifies you the only thing that limits the amount of resources that are available to you is if you already are working with a lawyer. And the only thing that disqualifies you from is free legal aid, right? Because you're already working with a lawyer, you're already getting advice. But we can always still connect people to rental assistance, and mediation it's a resource that's always available. The only for mediation, the only instances that we don't do mediation is if somebody else provides those resources through the government. So, it's for people who are going through divorces, who are actively in divorce cases, the court has resources that they want you to use. We talk to people after sort of maybe divorces happen and they're trying to, redo a kind of agreement or something like that in those cases. And there are certain instances where there's people feel a very strong risk or a very strong threat from another party. And so again, we're trying to create a safe space for people to do that. And so if one party says, I can't even, let's say there's, it's a victim of violence, and the perpetrator of violence is on the other side, right? Like the victim of violence is entirely within their rights to say, no, I don't even want to talk to them. Right. And at the heart of it, like mediation and even these resources through the early resolution program, they're all voluntary as well. So I do want to highlight that, because I talk to people a lot who say, hey, I got it. I'm going to pay my landlord that $300. Everything is fine. And I say, that's great. I'm really happy you have a plan. Here's our email in case anything changes there. So there are very few disqualifications, but, for legal advice, the question is always around where do you go for that legal advice? Because, we talk to people who are court referred. If there's an eviction case or in a consumer debt case, then there's that 855 hotline number. But if it's somebody who has a case that's not in that purview, there's still an organization called CARPLS who runs a general legal aid referral hotline. And that's available for anybody. And I can't guarantee that person will, that CARPLS general legal aid hotline can resolve your issue right there. At the very least, what they can do is talk to you and provide you advice. And that's sort of what we offer in general whenever we're connecting people to legal aid, because we say it's legal aid advice. It's not necessarily, sometimes people do get represented by legal aid attorneys in court, and those are, it depends on the legal aid attorneys, that organization's capacity, because there's a lot of people who we talk to every single day, a lot of people who are trying to help, and those legal aid organizations make their own determinations about what cases they can actually spend more time with and what cases are just kind of giving advice. Yeah, Mayor.
Yes, question. Thank you for the presentation. Now, let me ask you in broad terms. Earlier, you mentioned a list of systems of dispute resolutions, right? You had mediation, restorative justice, negotiated settlement, and arbitration. Now, if I understand you correctly, this type of system, they carry the same legal weight as if you were to go to the court system, right?
It depends. The only way that a conflict has legal weight is if it's involved in a court case.
Okay.
Right. And so if it's involved in a court case, what I mean by that is that there's a court case, the state is looking at it and trying to figure out and knows that some decision needs to be made there. And so, if we, for a negotiated settlement, mediation, or arbitration, those things are generally binding. And that is to say that there's a form that's written up that says what happened and what people agreed to. And then a judge signs it and it's entered into the official state records. And so that is an official thing that a judge signs off on. Now, for anything outside of that, that's a very good point, because if it's not involved in a court case, what we can do is to try and, as mediators, what we can do is write up a testament about what people agreed to, get them to electronically sign that, and give them that for their records. Now, what I always tell people with that is hey, this is not a legal document. It's a piece of paper that has your signature on it that may be helpful in the future in a legal case, but it is not a legal document because no judge has signed off on it. For restorative justice, it's a little bit, it's my experience based off of a restorative justice is that there may or may not be documents that are there that are produced out of that, but that there is some kind of communal understanding that happens afterwards and is summarized by the person leading that. But I do also want to note that restorative justice practices have been incorporated with the legal system. Specifically, there's a notable instance in North Lawndale. There's some other ones that have happened where it's been court-involved youth who have been put through the restorative justice process as part of sort of like their court process. And so they go through the restorative justice thing, a document is produced, and eventually a judge signs off on it. So in that sense, it's a legal document. But I think it's the connection of how alternative dispute resolution and how we're, on one side, how we're talking things out, how that interacts with the legal system. And sometimes it interacts very directly. Sometimes it interacts like a little bit askew, and sometimes there's no interaction at all.
Okay. Just follow up, please.
Yeah.
Say for instance, you have two parties who have to go to the mediation system, and then they go to it, follow all, go and meet and discuss. Go over all the dispute and stuff, and at the end, the mediator kind of renders a verdict. Now one of the parties is not too happy about the verdict. Now, can that party challenge the verdict? And if that is the case, where can they do it? Where can they go to challenge it?
Yeah, there's a little slipperiness in your question about sort of terms. And again, I want us to think about like what's the legal system? And when you're using the word verdict, I know that you may be meaning decision.
Decision, yes.
Yeah. But just a verdict, right, is the decision that the court makes. But I do want to highlight, again, for mediation in particular, the mediator does not make any decisions about what happens, right? So what the mediator does is has a conversation about all the things that are going on, all the different issues, tries to distill them down to think about what are the core things that people are really talking about, what are the core things that people care about, and then tries to invite them to think about ways that they can kind of, resolve that case. And so, an important strategy here is what we call options generating. And it's not even that technical of a term, right? It's common English, but like let's say I'm talking, you and Elsie have been mediating. I've been the mediator. We've talked about, okay, well, it sounds like, communication is really important because like there's a lot of bad communication going on here, and maybe that could be improved. And there's also worry about like reputation. Something's going on where you both are worried about how you're perceived by others and how this conflict is impacting that reputation. Well, look, Nair, I would maybe go to you and I would say, hey, it seems like these are two really important key issues. Like let's talk about communication first. Here's what I've heard are all the issues that are going on here. I wanted to see like, what do you think could help resolve this? What would you like to see, and what would you like to ask of Elsie in order to maybe move forward with that? I'd do the same thing with the reputation, and then I would go over to Elsie and I would do the same exact thing, and I would just help you all think about how you it's a sort of moving you into the productive mindset of like, well, like the forward-looking mindset, where do we go from here? To the extent that we want to actually move past this issue, like what are some options that actually allow us to do that? And then I would welcome us all back together, and I would ask you all to kind of talk to each other to the extent possible, or I would help facilitate that conversation if need be. But there, look, there, I want to just highlight, it's not about me making a decision about what's best. It's about me helping you and Elsie articulate some things that you would like to see and some options that might lead to a resolution.
Okay. Now, is there wait, one last question.
Yeah.
Now, but from how you describe it, so does that mean, I mean, is there like a time frame, within the time frame that we should come to a resolution, or is it more like can go for a long time? I mean,
Yeah, people can go for a long time, not only with resolution, but also with conflict, right?
okay.
But yeah, no, I mean, the standard way of thinking about it, and this is kind of a bureaucratic answer, is that there's different kind of time limits that we set for mediations. So a lot of those more like longer, more intense ones. So let's say it's an order of I have an order of protection against somebody, and we're ordered to mediation. Like we're gonna have up to 4 hours to kind of talk about that. That's a long time. We're going to take some breaks in there. It's a whole morning. It's a whole afternoon. It's a whole experience, right? Because there's a lot to talk about there. But, let's say you are my landlord and I'm your tenant, Lukner, and we're going to mediation. That might be something that's 60 to 90 minutes. And so, that in that time frame, we're going to see how much progress we make. I think that if a second session of mediation is needed. So if people say, man, we made some really good progress, and I think we just need some more time to kind of delve into like this issue a little bit more, we can go ahead and we can schedule another one, right? And we can go ahead and figure out a time to do that. But in general, we have mediation slots that are 4 hours, that are 2 hours, and then that are like 60 to 90 minutes. Back in the day when we were physically present in court, literally the mediator would take the people over to a side room and they would have 30 minutes, maybe 60 minutes at most, because they had to go back and speak to the judge immediately. And so it's a whole range. And we also do have cases that are these they're called chancery cases. And it's where, businesses and organizations are worried about money, right? And these are specific types of legal cases. And those can be all day. Those can be these whole marathon things. So it really runs the gamut. But the idea is that we try and anticipate how much stuff there is to talk about and offer the space in which to do that. And if a second session is needed, then we'll go ahead and we'll figure out how to make that happen.
Okay.
But oftentimes too, right? The mediation I've mediated a number of cases where we've not had a resolution, but they say, oh man, you've given me a lot to think about. And, I just need to kind of maybe run some numbers. And one of the final questions that I do there as a mediator is I say, hey, it sounds like you guys are already talking. How do you feel about that communication? To the extent possible, please keep on talking to each other because we made some really good progress here. Right. And it seems like there's only 1 or 2 pending things and you both want to try and figure this out. And so ultimately, my hope is, in the sense of same thing that I would say for most nonprofits is that if mediation is truly successful and if nonprofits are truly successful, they remove the reason for their being. Right. And so in a lot of ways, if these things were already happening in the world, and we didn't have to kind of advocate for them in any way, that's great. And so my biggest goal is actually to get people who feel like they're comfortable dealing with that conflict on their own outside of the mediation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Some really great questions and even better answers. I think there's so many resources available for residents in the city and just kind of knowledge as well. So I'm really happy that we're able to have this conversation and dive into it because it's a real thing. It's a real life thing that's, happening every single day. And again, just talking about the resources, getting that out there for folks is super important.
Yes.
Super important.
Yes.
Any other last kind of minute questions, comments?
Just all I would say is, again, if you have any questions, please reach out. And again, there are lots, like Carlos was saying, there's lots of resources out there. And it's the hardest thing that I've seen is the ability to navigate all the bureaucracies around us. So if you have an advocate, if you know somebody who's familiar with that system, that is a big help. And those people are out there. Talk to me, talk to other people, whoever. A lot of people know, people who can help you navigate those systems. So yeah.
One last question, please. What about sometimes you hear people who need like legal advice as far as immigration services, can they also reach out to you for?
Yeah, so that would be not the Center of Conflict Resolution. That's not the best resource for those types of questions. What I do know, and again, this is one of those systems, right? This is one of those things where there are resources out there, and it's sometimes hard to find them. I'll speak specifically kind of about the little village La Villita community. I live 2 blocks away from Latinos Progresando. They are an organization that specifically works with people who have immigration questions, and I believe maybe Elsie and Carlos may be better suited to answer for Uptown in particular. But in general, like again, there's the general Carpals hotline, and I'm happy to provide it if you need it. But that's also one of those ways where you call up that system, you say, hey, here's the issue, here's the thing that I need help with. And that person may not be able to help you directly, but the hope is that person can say, okay, here are some resources and places that you can talk to in order to get connected. And I understand that because I see this every day, that it takes time, takes energy. It takes a lot of tenacity sometimes to make one phone call, get another phone, give that other phone call, get another phone, kind of play until you get to the right person. And so I understand that is very frustrating sometimes. But sometimes you do have to have a little bit of tenacity in order to keep on calling, or call that other number that they gave you, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. Thank you, Elliot.
Just curious, I know for Carlos and Elsie and Natasha, maybe in Uptown, there's the People's Law Center, maybe? Is that still a thing around there? Are there other resources that you know of? Just for my own edification.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not too aware. I think that's part of this broader conversation, again, is making sure people are aware. I know Uptown is a very tight-knit community, so I'm sure that there are lots of resources. And for HAMOC specifically, we are starting our Community Navigator project, and that itself is part of bringing resources and making sure that people know that there are things available to them. Housing, know your rights, all those kinds of things are much needed educational materials that I think just communities in general in Chicago can benefit from. So we'll keep an eye out for more things, but definitely HAMOC is trying to be, one of those resources. We're trying to build that up.
That sounds great. And again, also quick plug to Uptown, because it's one of my favorite neighborhoods. It just has such a strong history of social engagement, of a lot of cool things that have happened there. I think particularly in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, until today, et cetera. But like, there's a lot of great resources that are there. And a lot of them sometimes just hide around a corner, right? that are there. So I'm really glad if HAMOC can kind of help.
Like the HAMOC.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. But now you guys are getting on Clark Street, right? So you guys are going to be, it's front prime real estate right there.
Yes, we are. We are very excited for our transition. And again, we're going to have a bigger space to help more community members to be really and truly that epicenter for Haitian and non-Haitian, undocumented and immigrant folks here in the city of Chicago. So having these resources, having these conversations available through that Community Navigator program that we're doing, really just building up just our community, building up what people know, because sharing information, education at the core of our mission, that is truly what continues the work and make sure that people who need these resources it's obtainable to them, and a lot of them for free too. I think that's a huge thing, is that at no cost or little cost for people, again, who need these resources the most.
Yep.
It's very important.
100%.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. And Elliot, thank you so much for talking to us about the Early Resolution Program. Again, lots of resources available for residents in the city, and just getting it out there is super important. So I'm very grateful for your presentation and how it can help people throughout the city now and in the future. So thank you for being here. Thank you everyone for tonight. Before we go, I do just want to make some quick announcements for the museum. So as we've discussed today, HAMOC is moving. We have found a bigger space here in Uptown. We are super excited and we'll be making that transition later this summer. We do have a fundraiser that is in effect right now. And with that fundraiser, with the smallest level of donation right now that we're asking is $50. But with that, people will get an invitation to view the museum before the grand opening. So hopefully everyone can check that out. We'll make sure links are available via our social media. And then lastly, May is Haitian Heritage Month, and HAMOC continues to celebrate all month long with different exhibitions and programming. We just opened a new virtual exhibition as well as a new in-person exhibition, so make sure to engage with us in those ways. Later this weekend, we'll be having a book signing with Teresa Hickman at the Bezezian Library. She is an author, educator, and new friend of the museum. We'll be there with her new book, as well as some activities for this family-friendly event. And then next week, another friend of the museum, King Kevin Dorval, is doing his Black Legacy Tour. He is based in Atlanta, Georgia, and he will be presenting on Haiti's Black excellence, highlighting the Haitian American Museum of Chicago as his first stop as a place doing that work. So that will be live streamed next Friday here from the museum. And we're really excited to be that special first contact in his tour. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Elliot, again, thank you for your presentation. Please reach out to Elliot and to HAMOC with any questions or comments. And like always, we hope to see you again at another HAMOC program in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again, everyone. Good night. Have a good one.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Have a good night.